one thing here. There we go. Okay. So again, my name's Russell, and I'll be the host. I'm the chairman of the Business and Legal Studies programs here at Penn Foster. And we're happy to have Mr. Timothy Falk here to talk about broken windows. And I'll be turning the webinar over to him in just a moment. Mr. Falk's talk today will be recorded, and we will be posting the recording to the academic criminal justice area of our community. So you will see it there if you miss it, or you'd like to review it again. This should be posted probably sometime next week. I'm thinking probably Tuesday or Wednesday next week. So we hope you find this presentation tonight interesting and instructive. Before we start, I just want to do a little housekeeping. Some of you may be new to webinars, so I just want to point out a couple things to you. First, you should have a control panel on the right side of your screen. You may minimize this panel by clicking on the arrow button in the upper left-hand corner of the control panel. It's a little red button. Secondly, you have the ability to submit questions and answers and answer questions if Mr. Falk has any during the webinar for you. There's a question box where you can type in your question. It looks like some students are already doing that. So I see a few questions in there already. So if you haven't already, give it a try. Just type in your name and you know, where you're located, you know, what state you're in. Just want to make sure that everybody's able to get in before we get started. I'm going to give everybody a second. I see a few. Looks like we got quite a few. Idaho, Kansas, Puerto Rico, Texas. Okay. Looks like we have quite a variety here from all different parts of the country. So that's good to see. So we've allowed about an hour for the webinar, but we can go over that time. So, you know, I'm not sure how many questions there will be as Mr. Falk goes through the webinar. Mr. Falk will, you know, kind of do the presentation, and if you see something or hear something that you want to ask a question about, you can type it in. You may not be able to answer it right away, but we'll try to answer as many as we can as he goes through the webinar. So I think that's all. So let's get started. Today, as I said, is the presenter's Timothy Falk. He's a former Indiana State Trooper who's been teaching criminal justice at Indiana University for about 6 years. And he'll be talking about the broken windows theory. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Timothy and let you take it. So go ahead, Tim.
All right. Well, good. It's good to be with everyone. Like Mr. Day said, my name is Tim Falk. I'm a former Indiana State Trooper. Those of you that might be familiar with Indiana, I patrolled the Fort Wayne area. That's where I live. That's northeast Indiana. And up on the toll road as well. If you've been across the Indiana toll road, I used to travel or patrol that area also. I have been teaching now for several years at the Indiana University campus in Kokomo, Indiana. And I've taught online at some various schools throughout the country. Now, I will say and point out, I'm not seeing any questions in the question box, just to let Mr. Day know that. I can see the box, but I don't see any questions. So I don't know if that's going to be a problem or if eventually
right,
they'll.
Well, yeah, so to say, if you want, I can feed them to you as I see them, if you want, or if you want to wait, that's up to you. I'm
okay.
With that, whichever way you want to go.
All right. Yeah, you can, you know, as they come in, you can let me know or somehow get those to me, and then we'll see if we need to address them right away. With your questions, feel free to send them out, and I may be able to address them immediately. I might be addressing that issue later on in the webinar, so we may just wait until then to actually address it, okay? And then we'll have a time at the end where we'll do questions as well. So I'm not sure why I'm not seeing that.
I don't know why either. You should be able to. Let's see here. Yeah, I have you set up the keyboard and the mouse. All right. Well, like I said, let me just yeah, I'll feed them to you as I see it.
Okay.
I'll have to screen them a little bit because they may be things that you're going to cover later on, and I kind of have a general idea of what you're going to cover. So.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, sounds good. Well, the point of this webinar is obviously broken windows. So there's been a lot going on in the past few years here in the United States involving policing. And I'm sure at some point in time you've heard, especially those of you interested in criminal justice, I'm sure you've heard the term broken windows on the media or on some type of news outlet out there. So I thought this webinar would be important to teach you about what broken windows actually is. What does it mean? So that's pretty much what we're going to try to cover today, discussing exactly what the broken windows theory is. Now, if I can, oh, there we go. All right, so with that, let's just start out talking about what is broken windows, okay? So we're going to address some of the issues in policing, and feel free, you can throw me those questions, and we can deal with those as well if I'm not covering them in the webinar. But what is broken windows overall? So when you hear about it, oftentimes you'll hear that broken windows has to do with minor or police enforcing minor violations. But, you know, it also can involve citizen involvement, right? Or are we also talking about a community policing type thing? The fact is all three are important when we're talking about broken windows and what actually goes into the broken windows theory or the metaphor that's there, okay? So with that, now this is moving kind of slow here, sorry. We'll try to keep up with the
transitioning. Here, let me try.
There we go. Okay, that works.
Yeah, for some reason it's very slow. I don't know why. Sorry.
That's all right. Yeah, we can work with that. All right, so broken windows, it's actually a metaphor. So obviously when we're talking about broken windows, they say broken windows because technically they're applying it, when they apply this, they really mean broken windows, but it goes a little deeper than that, okay? So the metaphor actually means, broken windows is a metaphor for a community that is run down, okay? A community that starts off vibrant, but because of one thing or another, the buildings become abandoned, grass grows up, weeds take over. Before you know it, there are several abandoned buildings, and the community descends into some type of crime-ridden area. So what that means is, for broken windows, is on an abandoned building, one window is broken out. If that window remains broken out, then that would attract someone else to come up and think, well, nobody cares about this building, so I'm just going to throw a rock and break out another window. And before you know it, all the windows are broken out. We move on to the next abandoned building, and it just looks like, it gives the appearance that the town is welcoming to criminal activity because no one cares. That's the premise of the broken windows theory. So how did it all begin? So if we talk about, or we want to discuss how or where this particular metaphor came from, there was an article published in the March 1982 issue of The Atlantic. So broken windows has been around for quite some time. But the magazine called The Atlantic, you can Google that. You'll notice at the end of this webinar there's a reference page that gives you some of the material that I used to put this together, books, articles. Feel free to download those, buy those books if you would like to learn more about broken windows if that's something you're interested in. But anyway, George Kelling and James Q. Wilson, two well-known sociologists and who specialize in criminology, wrote this article and basically came up with this broken windows metaphor. So what they did in this particular article was they began the article talking about a Newark, New Jersey foot patrol experiment that happened in the 70s. So what happened was, and they're trying to get at, they're trying to point mainly towards the community policing aspect of it. So when they would discuss, or they discussed this foot patrol experiment, what they found was Newark decided, well, we're going to see what actually works, because the 1970s is when the government started pouring a lot of money into criminal justice research, seeing what worked in policing. We were starting to professionalize police departments. So we wanted to see, did foot patrol work better than patrolling around in an automobile? And we were trying to get to see how the close contact with citizens worked. Did it actually lower crime? Okay, so what they did a 5-year study here, and they found that after that 5-year study that crime actually did not go down. In the areas that were covered by this foot patrol, they found that the crime actually stayed just about the same. But the public felt safer. The crime was just almost the same, but the public felt safer. And the police-community relationship grew stronger. So out of this research, we found that even though crime still stayed at the level that it was, people felt safer. The fear of crime was lower because the police officers were there. And the police-community relationship grew stronger because the police officers on the beat got to know the people that were there. There was more interaction. I mean, and think about the logic of that. And with a police officer sitting in a car off of a corner of Walmart or whatever, it doesn't seem very approachable, as opposed to the police officer that might be walking the beat. So this is where they get this whole, or begin this study where, or find that community policing does help when you have the police officer out on the street actually lower or increase the public safety aspect of it, lower the fear of crime. So an interesting study that they also talk about that to help them devise this broken windows metaphor was this experiment that was conducted by Dr. Philip Zimbardo in 1969. Philip Zimbardo is a psychologist, and he does a lot of study of inmates and criminal behavior and that sort of thing. He's also, some of you may be familiar with the Stanford prison experiment from the 60s. This was Dr. Philip Zimbardo also who did the Stanford prison experiment. And anyway, what they did is they took two cars. So they put one car in the Bronx. They put it up in the Bronx in an area that was already somewhat run down. Put it up in the Bronx, no plate, hood up. It looked abandoned, like nobody really cared about this vehicle. And then again, it was in a window where, or I'm sorry, it was in an area where the buildings were somewhat run down. And within a very short amount of time, the vehicle was, quote unquote, attacked by a group of people. Windows broken out, it was vandalized, it had been stripped, it was up on blocks, everything taken out of it within a very short period of time. Then what they did is they put another car on a street in a ritzy neighborhood, okay, an affluent neighborhood out in Palo Alto, California. And what happened was this car sat untouched for weeks. Nobody touched it. Again, it's in a more affluent neighborhood. So Zimbardo goes up to it with a sledgehammer and starts smashing out a couple of the windows. And lo and behold, when people saw that, they didn't necessarily see him smash out the windows, but they saw that the car was being destroyed. More people joined in. So, and within hours, the car was destroyed. But it sat there untouched for weeks when it was in untouched or it was in a decent condition. So they were able to show, though, You know, up in the Bronx, where it's somewhat run down, the car didn't last very long. In this other affluent neighborhood, it went untouched until it actually started getting windows bashed out of it, and dents put in the side of it. And then everyone joined in, got out some frustration, that sort of thing, and eventually just destroyed this vehicle. And so they used that for their broken windows theory to show that when you let things, or when you let a certain object or a community run down, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we're in an affluent area or the area like the Bronx. If you have, or a section of the Bronx, if you have an article that looks like it's, or something there, a building, no matter what, that is not taken care of, then it's prone to continue to go downhill, and that's what that means. Let me see if I can get this to advance here. Okay, great. All right, so we talked about some of the components of broken windows. Obviously, community policing. Okay, so what is community policing? Community policing is basically the police working to build a good working relationship with the public. But the thing is that also has to include the public receiving that conduct from the police, or that relationship building from the police. And so,
sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. It has to be a two-way street. Okay, when we talk about community policing, it has to be a two-way street, but the police have to be the leaders of it for obvious reasons. Okay, and with that, you know, that's probably the main component. What I like to do is I like to tell students is go through that 1982 article in the Atlantic, and I challenge them to show me in that article where it says the police have to take everybody to jail for minor violations. You know, this broken windows theory won't work unless the police are jailing everybody for quality of life violations like minor drug or vagrancy and that sort of thing. The article is several pages long, and nowhere in it does it say or recommend for the police to start dragging everybody to jail. Okay, but what they do try to focus on throughout the article is community policing and public involvement. Okay, but it does say public involvement through positive police-community relations. Citizens take pride in their neighborhoods. Okay, they're stakeholders, right? The public is a stakeholder in their own community, and I think that is something that we can all understand. And no matter what, you know, the police are the people that we have out there that we pay to confront and take care of issues that the rest of us really don't want to take care of. But it's incumbent upon us all to actually take pride in our neighborhood. Okay, and I'll talk about what happened in New York here in a second that involved the civilian element as well, and the citizens of that city in reducing their particular crime. But there is one area here, you know, they don't stress the taking people to jail, but there is an enforcement of minor violations. Okay, the enforcement doesn't necessarily mean that the people have to go directly to jail or that the police have to have a great involvement in that. But it's important to understand that these laws are passed by elected officials. They're not passed by a group of police officers that give them more power and that sort of thing to you know, mess with the disadvantaged in a neighborhood. These laws are passed by elected officials who are there by the, or who are elected obviously by the community. Their jobs are dependent upon being selected for this office. Okay, so if they pass a law, then in theory we have to say that, well, it was wanted by the public. So if it's a minor violation, a quality of life issue, it's passed in order to maintain some type of order in that town. Okay, so the police are there to enforce it, and that's why we see the police on a daily basis. Okay, the police are probably the #1 governmental organization that we see daily. Okay, if you live in a big city, you probably see your city police department every day. So it says Police will also engage in order maintenance. Okay, so this is where we remove potential troublemakers. We don't necessarily take people to jail. We're going to try to remove them before we actually arrest. Arrest is considered a last resort when we're dealing with some of these minor violations. Now, there are some exceptions to that when a project is being worked, and again, when I get to the section on what happened in New York City, I'll go into further detail about something called CompStat. So, and a project that was put into place there that dealt with statistics and hotspot policing, which a lot of people get confused completely with broken windows. All right, so does broken windows work? Well, let me stop right here and ask Russell, are there any questions there that are relevant or that I should address? Again, I don't know why, but I am not seeing any questions.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see any here at the moment. If anybody has any questions as we go through this, feel free to ask them. You know, put them up on the question box. So far, so good.
Great, great, that's good. Maybe that's why I'm not seeing any if there are none there, so that's good. All right, so now we talk about this, whether or not broken windows works, okay? Because if we look at it, again, you know, the news media likes to point out that the broken windows theory is all about the police arresting people, minorities in particular, being aggressive in minority communities, and it can cause issues that way. That is a it's wrong to assume that that's what broken windows is all about, because it's not. It's more about the community policing part of it and the public taking more pride in their own area. So whether or not broken windows work. So let's look at a couple of quick examples here. So New York City subways, late 1980s, vandalism everywhere, homeless people sleeping in the subways, muggings taking place, legitimate riders, the numbers decreased because people were afraid. People were afraid to get on the subway. So when legitimate riders decrease, what happens? Revenue goes down. And so this is noticed, okay? People were admittingly wearing less jewelry or whatever, and clothes that made them, they were wearing clothes that made them less appealing to beggars, okay, or muggers that might be in the subway. There were actually crimes and violent sex crimes that were happening on the subway system themselves, or on the subways. And so what was going on then was they decided their first order of business is to clean up this graffiti. So what was going on in the New York City subway system is, you know, people were able to jump these turnstiles. They were spray painting graffiti all over the sides of the cars. And it was thought, again, broken windows is about cleaning up the area, making it look more presentable, not making it look like we want criminals to come in here. You have to make your area look as if somebody cares. So what they decided to do, the civilian that was in charge of the subway system in New York at the time said, whenever somebody spray paints graffiti all over these cars, we're going to immediately pull them off of the tracks. Immediately pull them off the tracks so their work can't be advertised. And we'll put another clean car on, we'll scrub the graffiti off, and we'll get it back out there. And that's what they did. And eventually, the people stopped. They stopped putting graffiti all over the cars. They were able to clean it up a little better. A guy by the name of William Bratton, and I apologize, I didn't capitalize his last name. A guy by the name of William Bratton was then hired as chief of the New York City Transit Authority. So those are the people that were in charge of the subway system. So William Bratton was hired as chief by the mayor that was directly before Rudy Giuliani. And he said, okay, what can you do down here in the subway system? Can we help to clean this up and lower crime? So he wanted to start using a little bit of the broken windows theory. Okay, this was late 80s into the early 90s. He wanted to use some of this broken window theory. And what New York was trying to do was run off some of these, the homeless people that were sleeping in the subway. However, they made, they passed some city ordinances, state laws, and they were all overturned by appellate courts and deemed to be unconstitutional because those areas are all public. And as long as the homeless people were not being aggressive, that they had the right to be in that public area, okay? And so those laws were overturned. So they had to be somewhat creative. And I'm sure some of you have been to the bigger cities where you've been accosted by some aggressive panhandler. It's very uncomfortable, okay? Yes, we like to help people out on occasion. You can drop some money in a tin or whatever, help some homeless people out that need it, but it's the people that are aggressive and yelling and cussing at you and following you around that is the problem, okay? And this causes fear. Whether or not they actually commit a crime, it causes fear, which then causes the public not to want to go out or to go in that particular area. So what old Bratton did there is Bratton decided that, well, we're going to put officers on the subway system itself. So we're going to put officers inside the cars. So they put these officers inside the cars to help reduce crime that was actually taking place inside of the cars, okay? And that worked because there were police there and people are less likely to commit the crimes when the police are actually there. It was almost like the walking the beat thing, okay, except this actually did reduce some of the crime. Another one of Bratton's ideas was to deal with these homeless or these aggressive panhandlers that were in the subway system. So what he did was they worked and they hardened the subway system, meaning they made it more difficult. They installed new turnstiles. They made it more difficult for people to jump these turnstiles. You had to pay, you had to have a card or whatever it was to get inside, but to be able to get through these turnstiles. But the homeless people that were there, they were still allowed to be there. Okay, but the thing is, if they were aggressive, then the police would simply go up to them, number one, and ask them to stop. And that's what Bratton's order was to them, and was to just ask everybody to stop. So they asked, well, tell them to stop. If they don't stop, then tell them to leave. Okay, because then you can be trespassed. If you didn't know that, you can still be trespassed because of your behavior from a public area. So he was told, officers were told to trespass the aggressive panhandlers. And if they didn't listen then and they came back, then we could find them in violation of a trespass order and then take them to jail there. So the third and final option was jail them. However, we're dealing with their behavior before then without taking them to jail. And I hope that's easy to understand. So he said, tell them to stop. That's the officer involving and trying to maintain order. If they don't stop, tell them to leave. Okay, that's reasonable. And if they don't leave or they come back, then they are under arrest for trespassing. Okay, so I hope that's easy to understand in his thought process. And we're not saying automatically snatch these people up and take them to jail. It's the last resort. We're still controlling crime, reducing the fear of crime, and maintaining order, yet the last resort is taking somebody to jail. Let's see here.
Tim, I have a couple questions here on things you talked about earlier.
Okay.
If you want to take a moment here. We have a couple here. First one is from Chastity. Is community policing more involved with the community, such as neighborhood watches?
Yes, Neighborhood Watch is definitely something that is a community policing initiative, and does involve someone that is motivated about helping their community. Now, we've heard a lot in the last few years about community policing, about the Neighborhood Watch and what they are allowed to and what they're not allowed to do. And the Neighborhood Watch is just basically designed to actually keep an eye out and then report to the police. You know, the police can't do their jobs without the involvement of the community. So yes, the Neighborhood Watch is a good program that is basically the backbone of a good community policing program.
Okay. I have another one from Daniel. This is kind of a long one, but essentially he lives in Trenton, New Jersey. There are communities in Trenton the city of Bratton, where crimes are committed every hour because of that. Families who want their children to have a future move to other communities that are better for them. Is the evidence of the broken window theory making an impact as expected? I guess it's referring to situations like that where you see flight from the city.
Where you see the city that's becoming run down and people are fleeing the city to go to suburbs and that sort of thing? Is that what he's asking?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
Well, there are some instances where we can see that the broken windows theory does work. It's not perfect. If the police department is actually following the broken windows theory and doing what they're supposed to do with it, then yes, it has been shown to be effective. I will give some statistics here in a second about when we get out of the New York City subway here and we start talking about what actually happened on the streets. We'll give some statistics on how it actually changed compared to the rest of the nation. You know, even though crime did fall altogether, how it actually fell more in New York City. But yes, you know, if I'm not sure what is going on in Trenton, New Jersey. You know, I would like to address that. I wish I could see the question. Unfortunately, I can't. I would like to address that question more. But yes, there is evidence that shows that the broken windows theory and community policing can be effective in helping to reduce crime. Not only just reduce the fear of crime, which is the most likely outcome of it, but also in reducing crime in general. Okay, and I hope that somewhat answers if I'm hearing the question correctly.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen him respond so yet. So I'm going to move on to just two others here right now, and we might come back to some of them. But I have one from I have one from Judy. She's talking about where you were talking about taking them off the street, putting them in jail.
Yeah.
If you take them to jail and you let them out, won't they do it again because they have no place to go? And what do you do with guys like that, basically?
Well, it is quite possible that they'll come back and do it. You know, they call it recidivism, the reoffending rate. Generally, that is applied to people that have been convicted and then get out of prison or jail and continue the criminal behavior. But yes, it is possible that we remove someone from the situation and then they actually come back to right back to where they were before. You know, I've had that situation where we've actually tried to get people into shelters, and it's just been unfortunate because they were either on some type of a controlled substance or they had some other behavior that the shelter did not want someone that was associated with that behavior in their particular facility. So in some ways, you know, we had no choice but to actually take them to jail. And was it possible that they would bond right out and be able to go into or back to that scenario? Yes, it's very possible that would happen, and it's just a recurring cycle, unfortunately. But the overall goal is that you very well might have to take someone to jail in order to get them some of the social service attention that they need. Okay, there might be some type of help that they would be able to receive because they have been jailed. I'm not saying, and the broken windows theory is not suggesting that people who are homeless or vagrants necessarily need to be taken to jail right away or automatically. So, you know, we're getting into that routine right now where community policing is starting to take off and get more attention, and police officers are better trained in the available social service agencies and how to resolve conflict without necessarily having to take someone to jail immediately, because we realize that there are other options for people. But the simple fact is, some of the shelters and some of the other areas or the social service agencies won't deal with these people until they're sober or have been arrested. Again, they don't have to be convicted, and we're not discussing that at this second. But yes, I mean, it's difficult to say exactly what we do, but with those people, when they come right back out, you may end up having to rearrest them right away. You know, I've seen that as well. It's not common. It's not common because if they, you know, they will generally have to stay in jail a few days at least before they're let out. And, you know, generally they can get the help or referred to a social service agency. Salvation Army does a lot with getting them transportation or some type of place to stay. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, I have one more, and then we'll let you move on, and we can come back to some of these.
Okay.
This is from Victor. In the New York City subway crime in the late 70s. Was they're not the guardian angels? Did they, you know, provide or instill a sense of security for the public? Do you think that has something to do with it as well?
I do. Yes, that's definitely a good, I would say, community policing type initiative. Those are members of the public that have stood up and become involved in helping to reduce the fear of crime, and that is part of the broken windows theory. Again, it's not all about the police. It has to have an engaging public. And that's a very good point that you make there about the guardian angels, and they are actually still there, if I'm not mistaken, and in other areas of the country where they are there to help escort, help to do whatever they need to do to reduce an individual's fear of becoming a victim of crime. So yeah, that's a good, very good point that was made.
Great. I'll let you move on at this point. We have a few other questions, but we'll try to get back to them at the end of the webinar.
Okay, and if I'm not, because I can't see these questions, unfortunately, so I will give my email address, and anybody that wants to email or correspond, we can do what we need to do to get answers and help you better understand that way. Okay, so let's get back into this when we're talking about the does it actually work? So I think I covered most of this in this particular PowerPoint slide as well. So what they ended up doing is, you know, they did take several people to jail. Crime went down. They didn't just necessarily take people to jail for the vagrancy or panhandling, that sort of thing. There were other things as well that they basically had no choice in certain situations but to take people to jail. But an amazing statistic here that you can look at was citizen complaints about the police went down. So if the police were in the subway system then doing now what you could essentially say is their job, people were happier with that. People were satisfied. Job satisfaction was higher for the police because the public respected them more. Okay, morale of the police officers was higher. They were happier to come in to do their job, and that created an atmosphere where there were less complaints generated from the general public. People were happier about the way the subway systems were policed. Okay, and of course then through that the number of subway riders actually increased as well, and as a result revenue went up. Okay, so good old William Bratton there, he was chosen by Rudy Giuliani. After Giuliani was elected mayor, Giuliani said, hey, well, what can you do up here on the streets? We see you cleaned out the subway. What can you do up here on the streets? So he says, all right, well, we'll put you up here on the street and see what you can do with the broken windows theory then. So he, because if you remember the late 80s, early 90s in New York City, if you go back and you look at the homicide rate and rate of robberies and that sort of thing, it was unbelievable compared to what it is today. The numbers are just unbelievably, there's a huge difference in the numbers. So he was tasked with lowering the crime rate. First task was to transform the community policing policy, though. You don't hear a lot about that. When William Bratton takes some hits on his policing policies, but you don't hear a lot about how he transformed the community policing unit in New York City. What happened was, before he took over, they wanted to, if you remember, community policing became a huge thing after the Rodney King issue in LA, okay, so early 90s. And so New York City wanted to make their own community policing unit. So what happened was they put rookies through an academy, and these rookies were supposed to be the community policing unit. So Bratton, when he took over, he's like, why do we have rookies being the community police officers? They don't even know how to be police officers. And they're working 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. We all know crime doesn't happen 9 to 5. And so he completely revamped that, changed the schedules around, and he put veterans in the community policing unit because they knew how to interact, they knew what to look for, they knew how to talk to people. And he wanted the rookies to get out there and get their feet wet, make some arrests, become a police officer, see what it's like, okay? And he also gave more authority to precinct commanders in a way. Okay, in determining whether or not, you know, where to patrol, how to patrol, that sort of thing. But he also developed this thing called CompStat, okay? It's called comparative statistics, still used today around the United States in various capacities. But what CompStat was they had weekly meetings, they were administrative meetings, and they would actually sit down and see where the crime was taking place. And you'd think it's a genius thing to do, and I can't imagine why they weren't doing it at the time already, but they would shift police patrol to those areas. So if there was an area where there was high crime, then they would basically call it hotspot policing, and they would move the police officers to that particular area, okay? And this is where they would order the enforcement of minor violations. Again, you don't have to go to jail. It's just that the police officers are trying to do what they can to maintain some type of order. Let's see here. Okay. All right. So anyway, that's what old William Bratton did. If you know anything about New York City right now, William Bratton is again the commissioner, New York City Police Department commissioner. He was appointed by the current mayor. I believe he took office 2015, maybe 2014. I can't remember when they had their latest election. But he is the current New York City Police Commissioner. So when we talk about, and I'll get to more of that here in a second, about Bratton and the statistics in New York City, opponents to broken windows.
I'm sorry, Tim. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it sounds like there's something going on with your phone, or we're getting a little breakup here and there.
Okay. Are you hearing me now, or? Hello?
Kind of fading out a little bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah.
You got me now, or no?
You're kind of breaking up a little bit.
Hello?
Yeah, why don't we try to continue? Let's see what's happening here.
Hello?
A little bit of static.
There's a storm going on outside. I might have some type of an issue with my internet connection. We got some thunder going on. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but again, there's quite a bit of static.
Okay, hang on 1 second here.
All right. Hang on, everyone. It sounds like we're encountering a little technical difficulty.
Okay, so is that doing anything? Or?
Well,
Are you able to hear me there or no?
Oh, that's better. That's better.
Hello? You got me?
That's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I had to disconnect a couple of things. Sorry, I wasn't quite sure what was going on there. Hang on one second.
Yeah, no, you're clear now.
Okay, great. Okay, so let me now see if I can't get back to this and be able to control. Whoops, sorry. Looks like my PowerPoint's losing control here. All right, so opponents of broken windows. Sorry about that. I'm having a storm here in my town. So anyway, opponents of broken windows. So obviously not everybody agrees with this. And like I've told you, there are some people that actually believe that broken windows is infringing on the rights. It's unethical police tactics, infringing on the rights of minority populations in particular. So it says it encourages enforcement of violations in low-income areas. Well, to just be honest, and I'm not trying to be unsensitive here, but the crime rates are generally higher in those areas, and it's not because the police only enforce crime in those areas, but that's where the police are called to enforce crime. In an area here in Fort Wayne, Indiana, let me give you that quick example. In this area, Fort Wayne, we have our city police department has 4 quadrants, and the 4 quadrants are you know, the police are assigned to patrol a particular quadrant. The southeast quadrant is primarily minority population. They are responsible for nearly 40% of all of the calls that come into the Fort Wayne Police Department. That's one quadrant. So nearly 40% of all the calls that come in are from that one quadrant. So yes, in certain areas, you're going to look at that in cities where the crime actually is there. The police are called there. So to say that that's a negative of broken windows is incorrect in a sense that you know, the police are there attempting to reduce the fear of crime for the law-abiding citizens that are actually calling them there. Okay, so I hope that's easy to understand. But they do say also this crime decline of the 90s was a result of improved social policies and not just the policing. Okay, so let me see here. And not just the policing. But let's look at the actual reasons for the crime decline of the 90s, okay? Incarceration rates, right? Rates grew in the 90s in New York, but not in excess of the national trends. So if we look at incarceration rates, so yes, incarceration rates did go up in the 90s. We changed mandatory prison sentences, mandatory sentencing guidelines, and so that just naturally increased incarceration rates. So New York had an enormous reduction of crime. So if we look at incarceration rates and compare that to how it was in the rest of the United States, yes, incarceration rates did have something to do with the reduction of crime. As you can see, incarceration rates grew in New York as they did in the rest of the United States. High-risk age population. The high-risk age population in New York City actually decreased, and the high-risk age population is the 15 to 24 age range, okay? It decreased, but it decreased less than the national average, okay? So it went down, but the national average of those people in that age range went down even more, okay? So to say that, or what I'm trying to get at here is how effective broken windows can actually be when it's used properly. Unemployment went down, but declines were much smaller than the national average. Okay, so in the rest of the United States, crime still went down, but it went down more than what it went down in New York. Understand that? And meanwhile, New York saw crime rates decline at twice the national average. So even though those social policies there changed and did have a dent in, or made a dent in the crime, the crime rates of New York City, those particular social policies had more, or were used more, there was more of an effect in the general or the rest of the United States. Okay, so something was going on in New York City that helped New York City see even more of a crime decline. Okay, and I contend that that decrease was helped by the broken windows policing. Okay, so here are some statistics for you. Homicide between 1990, and this information comes from the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports, the UCR. You can easily Google those and find out these statistics. So between 1990 and 2000, we had a homicide rate reduction in New York City of 73%. So in that 10-year period, 73%, while the rest of the United States saw a 38% reduction. Rape of 52 and 32. You can see New York City had a much higher rate of reduction than the rest of the United States. However, the rest of the United States saw bigger changes in the social policies that we talked about, okay, such as unemployment, less high-risk population or high-risk age, that sort of thing, okay, and they also saw higher incarceration rates, or right about the same incarceration rates as New York City. That was about the same, but yet New York City has such a high number of crime, a higher number of crime reduction. So it's not an easy explanation. No matter how you look at it, we cannot say that it's one thing. Okay, it's a combination of everything. We can't say, oh, it's broken windows that solved all the problems, because it is a combination of everything else. But some of the other areas around the United States weren't doing what New York City was doing in terms of the broken windows policy. Okay, so they weren't doing the CompStat that was actually created by New York City and the hotspot policing, and more police agencies do that today as a result of the success from New York City. Okay. All right, so we can't look at one thing. It's all a combination of everything, but we can't say that the broken windows theory didn't work, because we have evidence to show that something was happening in New York to help it go down that wasn't happening in other places of the country, and that was the CompStat, the broken windows, and the policing policies that were set forth under Rudy Giuliani and William Bratton while he was commissioner. Okay, so something that can't be ignored. NYPD went from 34 to 53,000 police officers. They improved their community policing efforts, and they developed this CompStat thing. Okay, so we cannot ignore those when we look at whether or not policing actually had an effect on the crime rates. Okay, yes, I do agree. Social policies were improved, just like they are today, and we can't ignore that. So I do want to just mention a couple quick things about crime displacement and diffusion here. A lot of people will say, well, if we are going to enforce minor violations or take people to jail in a certain area, isn't that just going to make them go to another area, okay, and commit the crime? So if we focus on this particular street corner, aren't they just going to go to another? Well, there is actual research out there that shows that displacement, which is what that is called, displacement is actually very rare. Okay, it doesn't happen as much as people would like to claim when they're saying that an aggressive police initiative just causes the crime to go other places. That's not true. It's very, very rare, and when it does happen, it's not happening at a large percentage, okay, or at a large rate. Crime diffusion, however, okay, this is police may target one specific crime but see a reduction in other crimes as well. So this is where we go and we actually say some of the enforcement of minor violations might actually help reduce some of the more severe violations. One good example of what happened in New York City And a good story about the CompStat situation is there was a particular street corner that was had a high gun crime rate. Okay, they were having a lot of issues with violent gun crime. So what they also noticed from their undercovers and some of their informants was there was some minor drug offenses that were happening in this particular area. Okay, so in order to clean that up, what they thought was, well, if we go actually to this particular street corner and we arrest people for what we can actually arrest them for, we might not get the gun charge, but we can get something else, and we'll take them to jail get them off the street and see what happens. So what they saw was a crime diffusion. By arresting those people that were dealing the drugs or in possession of small amounts of marijuana, they also saw a reduction in the gun crime. Okay, so by enforcing those minor violations, it is very, very possible that that could lead to a reduction in those more serious crimes. Okay, and I wanted to point that out to you. Crime displacement, you know, you don't get the full story on that just from the media either. There's actual research that shows that it's very, very rare that people will, they basically will stop doing what it is that they were doing. And crime diffusion does happen, where if we arrest people for minor violations, it could possibly reduce more serious violations. Let's see here. I can't get the thing to advance. Okay. Let me make sure that we're... All right, so I just want to wrap everything up here, and I just wanted to... I know we had a good discussion. Unfortunately, I couldn't see your questions. I'm going to give you my email address so we can... I'll be happy to address any questions that you have that way, or we'll have a few minutes here. But in conclusion here, broken windows is related more to community policing and citizen involvement than arrests, okay? But arrests do have to be made. We can't avoid that in some circumstances. In many circumstances, it is a last resort. Police enforcement or police involvement can simply be telling someone to leave the area, move on, try to clean up the area. But remember, broken windows is the community taking pride in their own area and keeping things cleaned up as well, and giving the police information when they are able to do that. So with broken windows tactics deployed, citizens feel safer, right? And have an increased confidence. So that is probably one of the most important things about this is when people feel safer, they tend to get out, move about more, they do what they need to do, they spend money, okay? So of course that's very, very important as well. So here's the bottom line. Okay, this is a quote that I like to take from Sir Robert Peel. Sir Robert Peel was the founder of the New London Metropolitan Police Force in 1829. Okay, 1829, he was the founder of the New London Metropolitan Police Force over in London. He's the founder of modern day policing, okay? They actually still call the police officers in London bobbies, because Sir Robert Peel. So they're still called bobbies. But what he did was he laid out this document. He said this is they call it the Peel's Principles of Policing. Okay, and one of those, I believe it's number 7. It says the police at all times should maintain a relationship with the public that gives reality to the historic tradition that the police are the public and that the public are the police. The police are only members of the public who are paid to give full-time attention to duties which are incumbent on every citizen in the interest of community welfare. So I don't know how you can explain community policing any better than that, okay? And the simple theory of broken windows. Yes, we were able to show that when we let things get run down, people feel like they can come in, no one cares, crime starts to flourish, okay? And when we all take pride in our community, not only the police, but all of us, because it is incumbent on us all to make sure that we are in a safe environment. When we clean up our neighborhood, when we do what we're supposed to do to help the police solve crimes, we are in a way also the citizen police officers. And in a way, I guess you could call us our own unorganized neighborhood watch, okay? But that is a duty that's incumbent upon all of us. And here are your references. So like I said, feel free to read over those. I'm glad to answer any questions that you may have. This is all, I love the broken windows theory. I love talking about the history of the broken windows theory and presenting some of those statistics. So I'm hoping that you had the opportunity to write some of those down. I'm not seeing a whole lot at this particular moment. So
yeah, we do have quite a few good questions here. I don't know that we can get to all of them. I just want everybody to know that we are going to go over the 6 o'clock time frame. And we're going to try to answer some of these questions before we go. So I have a couple here, and I have one from Miguel who asks about the fact that is broken windows the precursor to stop and frisk.
Oh, good. That is a good question, and in a way they did apply, or they did talk about broken windows being a part of stop and frisk. Now let me take a minute here to explain to you what stop and frisk is. Stop and frisk was never meant to be a police policy. It's a tool for law enforcement. So if an organization, if a police organization is using stop and frisk as a policy, that creates a problem with quotas and that sort of thing. And so they are improperly using stop and frisk, because with stop and frisk, in order for a police officer to stop a person and then frisk them, there has to be reasonable suspicion. So without reasonable suspicion, the police officer can't technically stop a person. Now they can stop them based on the person's, or reasonable suspicion can be brought about by training and experience on the police officer, but it's generally the person's behavior, okay, that draws that attention to the police officer. So yes, they do a lot of times say that broken windows was the precursor, I guess you could say, to stop and frisk. But then again, we're only going back to the broken windows being a method of police enforcing minor violations, okay? So stop and frisk was never meant to be a police policy. It's a law enforcement tool that was created by the Supreme Court under a case called Terry versus Ohio. I believe it was from 1963 or 1966, one of those. But it's Terry versus Ohio, and law enforcement commonly know those stops as the Terry stop, okay? And they have to, you're not under arrest, they can't actually search you, but they can pat you down, and that's what the frisk is. And technically, they're not allowed to frisk you unless they suspect that you have a weapon, okay? So again, it's different from broken windows. Broken windows has more to do with the community policing part of it. Stop and frisk, when they put it into a policy, I know in my humble opinion, they are misinterpreting what stop and frisk is actually supposed to be. It's a tool to help police intervene in potential criminal activity to stop someone from becoming a victim. And so with the stop and frisk policy, we've given it a bad name. I hope that answers that.
Okay, I have a couple others here, and they're all kind of similar. I'm going to use this one. I'm going to use this one as an example here. Okay, community members do not easily point out criminals in their neighborhood with the fear that criminals take guns overnight, and sometimes in the day to come after them. What can be done to get community involvement 100% in crime control?
Well, that's a good question. Yes, it's well understood that there are some community members who are afraid to come forward with information, because if they do come forward, then they're afraid that there will be some type of retaliation. Most police departments at this point in time have some type of anonymous reporting system. And those that don't are working on them, or they have a good undercover informant system. And how that works is the information is shared with the police, and then the police can use their own probable cause. The police will develop their own probable cause then to get specific warrants or make specific arrests based on that information. That way, they don't have to involve the person. Because if they involve the person and they use that person's information, it's quite possible that person would have to come to court and testify. But if it can be done anonymously and the police can build their own case with that information, then they can completely ignore that person. If you understand what I'm saying there, they can actually take that info and then build their own case from that. They can develop their own probable cause based on that info without actually saying that they used that info. Understand? Okay. You know, if they need more clarification on that, they can send me an email. But yeah, that's a very good question, because it's a difficult problem that police are trying to deal with, and to assure people that there is a confidentiality there, and you can do everything anonymously, and you won't become involved if the police can develop their own probable cause.
Okay. We have another one from Annabelle. How do you associate the broken windows theory with police objectivity? Does this theory open the door to profiling more than usual?
If it is used improperly, it possibly could. The thing is, when we talk about profiling, behavioral profiling and psychological profiling, 100% effective, they're good, okay? I shouldn't say 100% effective, but they're 100% good, okay? Police can use those. They use them every day. In terms of racial profiling, that's where we have a problem, okay? And police are misinformed on who is more responsible for crimes when they're actually engaging in some type of racial profiling. The objectivity, I would say that, you know, in a sense, when we talk about suspicious behavior and what can be noticed, yes, the broken windows theory is more or less very objective, because when we see a person that is actually being disruptive or obviously violating a minor statute or whatever it might be, they can be removed from that situation. Okay, now you might say being disruptive is more subjective than objective, but if it is, then the police officer might intervene to find out what's going on and then make a decision based on the facts after some basic questioning. But, you know, the objectivity part of it is where it's obvious, where we can see right when something is bothering someone, or they're actually, whatever they're doing is violating a written statute. Okay, so does it open the door for inappropriate profiling? Yes, if we are not following the rules. I should say no, because broken windows theory is often misunderstood. But it's unfortunate that, you know, people will apply that and try to use the broken windows theory to equate to the stop and frisk, which a lot of people do. And I'm hoping that you are able to see the differences after listening to this this webinar. But if we're using the broken windows theory as a policy, and we're saying that police actually have to make arrests, then yes, you know, that you are going to possibly skew that officer's version or interpretation of what is actually a violation of the law or what could be disruptive, just so they can meet a specific quota, and that is wrong.
Okay, I'm just looking to see if we have anything else. It hasn't really been covered. Oh, there is a question about the 1982 magazine article. I think it was in the Atlantic.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Had a question about that. That's one of the references here on the screen. Kelling, G, and Wilson.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then I think we have one more here that I saw. Here's a question about the homeless, and what do you do when you have when the homeless have mental issues? How do you assist those with this issue? That's from Ellen.
Okay. Yeah, and that's again, based on the state law and how that is meant to be handled within the particular state law. People that are homeless that have mental issues, which is a large number of them. I mean, we just need to be honest that, with our mental health system that we have in the United States right now, there are a lot of people that have been left homeless because of the care that was taken away from them when states started to close down mental hospitals. Our prisons and our jails are actually some of the biggest mental institutions in the United States because people are getting locked up. But in terms of what can we do for them if they have mental illness and we can identify that, really the only thing we can do, and it's sad, it's a sad state of affairs in our healthcare system, is if we can try to get them a 72-hour evaluation. And this is what I've noticed that, I was a midnight trooper for 10 years and I dealt with a lot of that stuff. Where, especially on the toll road, when we would deal with transient people that had mental illness and would be hitchhiking right from one semi driver to the next, I would try to get them a 72-hour evaluation. The thing is, our insurance system has improved a tad since then, but they wouldn't do a whole lot with them unless they had insurance or had a way to pay for it. Or if they threatened somebody, if there was an actual threat, or if they tried to hurt themselves. So what do we do with them? You know what? That's a very good question. What do we do? I can try to get them help, do what we can to get them help in the mental health system. And police officers do that every day. Or we can try to take them to a shelter where they can be get some type of assistance that way. However, the shelters are less likely to take someone if they are actually exhibiting signs of that mental illness in their behavior and that sort of thing. And again, I've had all those scenarios while I was a trooper, and just trying to figure out what to do with them, it was very, very hard. And there's not much we can do with them if the social service agencies and the mental health system, the medical professionals aren't willing to take them. So we have to simply find a place for them to go, and it may well be back at a public, maybe a truck stop or that sort of thing, which is what I did. You might be able to find a family member that would be able to help, hopefully, or someone that you can get in contact with. But seriously, that is a problem that we need to solve. I mean, that is a big problem. And with the improvements in our healthcare system that are slowly coming about, that is going to be less of a problem in the future, I hope.
Okay. All right. Well, it's 6:15 Eastern time at this point, so I think we're going to wrap it up. Did you want to give out your email address for students to contact you, or do you want them to have them contact me and then I can forward them to you, whichever you want to do?
I can give it out, but they can also contact you if they wish. I apologize for not putting it on the webinar on the PowerPoint here, but it is Timothy Falk, spelled just like it is on the PowerPoint there. 1976, so Timothy Falk 1976 at yahoo.com. So Timothy Falk 1976 at yahoo.com. Feel free to email if I didn't ask your question or answer your question. If you would like a follow-up, I will be more than happy. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing the questions, and I do apologize for that. I'll be more than willing to have a conversation with you on whatever it is that you need clarified. Or you can go through Mr. Day and he can get in contact with me, and I'll be happy to get you the information you need.
Yeah, if you're not able, if you don't have a way of writing that down, on the invite email that you got, there's a link for or my email address, and I'll be happy to forward your questions to Tim as well. So I just want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, so we will be putting it up on the community probably next week, I would think, maybe by the middle of the week. It usually takes a few days to do that. So you'll be able to view it again and go through the presentation and the presentation that Mr. Falk went through. At this time, I'd like to thank everyone who joined us tonight, and I'd like to especially thank Timothy Falk for being here and speaking with everyone. We had over 70 students at one point, so I think everybody, from the feedback I'm seeing, I think everybody got something out of this, or just about everybody got something out of this. I hope you enjoyed it.
Great.
So I'm going to wrap it up at this point, and everyone have a good night, and thanks, Tim, for spending some time with our students.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. All right. Have a good night, everyone.